Now for our final panel for today, Islands Are Rising for the Natural Environment, where our panelists will discuss environmental justice, disaster preparedness, and disaster risk resilience, moderated by Amanda Ellis, Director of Global Partnerships at the Global Futures Laboratory. Amanda has held senior roles at the World Bank, where she managed the President's Global Private Sector CEO Leaders Forum, the International Finance Corporation, and Westpac Banking Corporation. The author of 2 best-selling Random House business books and 5 research titles on gender and growth in the World Bank Directions in Development series, Amanda is a founding member of the Financial Alliance for Women and received the W Lifetime Achievement Award for services to women's economic empowerment and the East West Center Distinguished Alumni Award. Amanda is a former United Nations ambassador and is currently on the Hawaii Green Growth Board. Welcome back to our conference, Amanda.
Thank you, Lauren. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here again for this virtual conference. And thank you so much to the previous panel, which was just amazing. I love that line that leadership is about listening. And you're going to be hearing from an incredible group of speakers today, sharing their good practices. And hopefully from listening to them, we will be able to take many wonderful ideas back. So hawhide, aloha, and kia ora from Aotearoa, New Zealand, where I am currently. The theme of this conference is really thought-provoking. Islands are rising. Just how are they rising as sea levels rise from climate change? And how, being small countries or territories, can islands be so strong and powerful? Islander voices are louder more than ever. And of course, we all remember just who was responsible for the 1.5 degree mention, so critical in the Paris Climate Accords. So during the conference so far, we heard from Nicole Yamasi, the first Pacific Islander to have ventured into the deepest depths of the ocean and eager to build a marine lab of her own in Micronesia. We heard from 2 stellar STEM programs in the islands, Sea Grant and the National Science Foundation includes Island Alliance, bringing science into the community and creating pathways for islanders in STEM fields. And yesterday, Lieutenant Governor Tenorio hosted a conversation on the social aspects of sustainability, how islands are working to overcome poverty, substance abuse, homelessness, and now, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic. We also heard how islands are taking the initiative to protect natural resources and communities by creating a challenge initiative. We know that began in Micronesia, was taken up in Hawaii, the Caribbean, and now Europe. And I personally, as a board member of Hawaii Green Growth, am thrilled to see Guam Green Growth, which after launching in 2019, now is engaging so many partners locally, regionally, and around the world to accelerate the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals here and in other locales. And very finally, I'm just so incredibly moved by the seed talks that preceded this panel. I'm thrilled and honored to serve on the board of the Institute for Climate and Peace, of which Maya Sotoro is the co-founder, and was very moved to hear the stories, to know what's possible, to be inspired to take action, and to support those who already are. Now, I'm very excited to moderate this panel, Islands Are Rising for the Natural Environment, with 4 amazing islanders from a wide range of backgrounds and expertise. So please use the chat, pop your questions in there, any comments, of course, as well. We want to know who is attending and what you think of the presentations. Just quickly to give you an overview, and I will then introduce everybody just before they speak in more depth. So our 4 panelists today in Islands Are Rising for the Natural Environment include Martyn Forde, who is Energy Leadership and Knowledge Management Consultant for the Caribbean Electric Utility Services Corporation. And some of you may know that as CARELEC. Suzanne MacDonald, who is the Chief Community Development Officer at the Island Institute, Ulalia Woodside, my good friend and colleague from Hawaii, who is Executive Director for the Nature Conservancy for Hawaii and Palmyra. And finally, Melvin Pat-Borja, who is the Executive Director for the Commission on Decolonization based in Guam. So to begin, I am thrilled to introduce Ulalia Woodside, who took the helm as Hawaii Executive Director at the Nature Conservancy in 2016. And she tells me that she feels as though she had been preparing for this job for her whole life. Of a wildlife biologist and a Hawaiian culture practitioner, and grew up in a family dedicated to protecting the environment. Ulalia also served as Director of Natural and Cultural Resources at Kamehameha Schools, which is the state of Hawaii's largest private landowner, just prior to coming to the Nature Conservancy. Also a member of the State Board of Land and Natural Resources, a past Commissioner of the Hawaii Natural Reserve System, a past Chair of Hawaii Green Growth, and a kumu hula, or teacher of hula, a tradition that was passed down from her mother from the age of 3. So Ulalia, as the State Director for the Nature Conservancy in Hawaii and Palmyra, you are working on a variety of just amazing projects. One that you know in particular that I am so excited about is an 8,000-acre koa forest carbon project on the Big Island of Hawaii in partnership with Hawaii Green Growth and the Sustainability Business Forum. Please tell us about this project, how it got started, and if you see it as a model for other islands to help in carbon drawdown and improving local biodiversity.
Thank you very much, Amanda. I just want to check that everybody can hear me okay. And I put up a slide so that we can see some of what I'm talking about. Are you seeing and hearing everything all right? Fantastic. I love that question you just asked me there, Amanda. You know, living sustainably on this planet has been a lesson hard learned by our communities, and as we heard in the panel previous to this, it's been hard learned by communities of place, and especially our island communities. Those communities of people who have spent generations in one location, deriving their existence, food, fuel, shelter, identity, spiritual connection, recreation, occupation, our final resting places. They've made hard mistakes of mismanagement of resources and species extinction, but we've survived drought, survived flood, survived. This decade that we're in is arguably the most important for our planet. It could be the decade where our actions set us up for abundance, or we create a world that is crippled under the impacts of changing climate. We're feeling these effects in our island communities, whether it's storms and floods, increased temperatures, reduced precipitation, prolonged periods of drought. Our nearshore waters are struggling under the triple threat of climate change, ocean acidification, sea level rise, and those threats are compounded by land-based runoff, sediments, and nutrients, and unsustainable fishing. We're at this critical point where we need, as a community, to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions by mid-century to keep those global temperatures under 2 degrees. And most efforts of these goals have been focused on reducing fossil fuels, but we know that science shows us that natural climate solutions, and these solutions can be found on islands as well, can deliver up to 1/3 of what's needed. I want to pause on this for just a minute and harken back to where I started our presentation with the future is in the past, and that olelo no'eau, that Hawaiian phrase there. And what we see in these pictures on the right-hand side is we see a current pasture that's growing over a traditional Hawaiian dry agricultural beds. And in the image on the left, we see another pasture, and then on the right, we see a dense forest. What separates that pasture from that dense forest is just a simple fence that keeps out hoofed animals like cows, deer, sheep, and goats. At one time, that traditional agricultural field and the diverse crops had diverse crops and shrubs in a forest overstory. The humps of those walls kept good soil from eroding in into the ocean in big rains. And in that image on the left, that forest was once the native forest, which provided water for our communities, food products, forest products, habitat for native species. That's where our future is, in looking at the abundance of our land in good stewardship and in good management. At the Conservancy, our mission is to conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends, and to build that resilience to safeguard our communities. And we do this through innovation and through collaborative solutions. And one of those innovative and collaborative solutions is a forest carbon pilot. And the Nature Conservancy is partnering with the Sustainability Business Forum and the supporters and other supporters, and we've developed Hawaii's first forest carbon pilot project to bring carbon to market. Amanda mentioned Hawaii Green Growth and Aloha Plus Challenge, and those are where the Sustainability Business Forum grew out of. And I'm very proud to be a member of Hawaii Green Growth, an early adopter and on the board, and now a part of the advisory board, and a champion for Aloha Plus Challenge, and seeing how we've learned from each other, from the Micronesia Challenge to Guam Green Growth, and we share this knowledge. But we also have a way to share that knowledge with the business community. And so the Sustainability Business Forum is a group of business executives that are taking the initiative to shape the future of Hawaii by investing in these good choices. So there's lots that we can do in pursuing forest carbon. It can be a model of how other landowners can do this. We can demonstrate the feasibility of sequestration in Hawaii. It raises awareness of the good work that we can do in our community and contributes to our climate goal. Our specific project is very small. It's just a pilot, but we hope to protect those watershed values. I was thrilled to just see that teaser clip about Guam's watershed protection project. And that's what this project hopes to do as well, is to protect those watershed values. We know that the extractive types of uses, extractive models of harvest, we know what they do for us. They were in those images I shared earlier. But how do we move to a model that is not extractive, but rather it saves those tons of carbon that are there in that forest? And that by bringing them to market, we might be able to realize revenue and funding that can go back into caring for that forest. In Hawaii, this model has the potential to influence about 1 million acres of land that traditionally was in this type of forest, but now has gone through a number of extractive uses because this wood koa is so valuable. It's been harvested in a number of places. But how do we bring back this native forest and also bring back value to those landowners? And one way in doing that is in partnership. Partnerships with watershed people, partnership with businesses. So I think, Amanda, to get to your question, yes, these are the types of exciting opportunities that we have in islands, exciting growth and learning that we're doing. We can share with each other lessons from the past that can help us into the future.
Wonderful. Mahalo. Thank you so much, Ulalia. And I love the way you are bringing together both Indigenous wisdom and innovation and collaborative solutions that can really have a multiplier impact through market mechanisms. So just very exciting and inspiring. And now I would like to introduce from Guam, Melvin Pat-Borja, who is the Executive Director of the Commission on Decolonization, also the President of the Department of Chamorro Affairs. And I don't know how you have time to do everything you do, Melvin. So prior to this appointment, Melvin served as educator in the public school system for over a decade, has a Bachelor's of Education and a Master's in Arts in Pacific Island Studies from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. So Pat, in your current role as Executive Director on the Commission on Decolonization and the Chamorro Language Commission, you're also chairing the Guam Green Growth Sustainable Alliances Working Group. So I first wanted to ask you how Guam is finding and preserving its culture and identity in linking this to sustainability And perhaps you could also briefly mention the kind of sustainable alliances that Guam is working on to develop as part of the Green Growth Initiative. So a two-part question. First of all, the link of culture and identity and its preservation to sustainability. And then second, the kind of sustainable alliances that you are working to develop as part of the Guam Green Growth Initiative.
Forde, thank you for having me, and thanks for this opportunity. I wanted to answer the first question, I wanted to first thank Kumisan Chamorro, which is our Chamorro language preservation arm of our cultural services, and then the leadership of the G3 initiative and the opportunity to tangible these concepts into the effort. So I wanted to preface this by saying that I spent quite a bit of time living in Hawaii when I was going to school, and one of the really valuable experiences that I took with me is this idea that the Kanaka Maoli people believe that they should be their people, their culture should be at the center of conversations around sustainability, and appropriately so. We like them have not only survived but thrived in our respective islands for generations prior to Western contact. And so, for example, I did work, in my other life, I was a spoken word poet, and we did some educational work in Molokai. And one of my good friends who hosted us there runs this traditional Hawaiian fish pond. And he always says that to us, that, the Hawaiian people they know best how to survive in these islands and how to thrive in these islands, how to live a sustainable life. And that, the answers that we seek for, our push into the future really are embedded in our history and in our past, which is a very appropriate Pacific way to look at something, right? Pacific Islanders, when we look to answers for the future, we look to the past. We believe that our future our past is in front of us, because that's our source of strength. And so, when we started to get involved with the G3 initiative, obviously it's a fantastic approach and perspective. It's great that we have such high level of cooperation and collaboration. But it was definitely clear that, what was missing was this, this very deliberate Chamorro perspective. And so we just started a conversation with Austin and Kumisan Chamorro on ways that we could genuinely incorporate Chamorro traditional cultural values into the approach of sustainability. And so, for example, one of our core values is something called Inafat Malik. Malik means good. And Inafat Malik is like to make things good for all of us. But it's more than just making things good. It's also making things right. It's also creating justice, equity, responsibility, and the consideration of harmony between us, our natural environment, and with each other. And so, it was really important for us to take this very deliberate approach. And I totally even used like Hawaii as the example. I was like, hey guys, Hawaii got it going on. You know what I mean? The culture, the language is happening. It's incorporated, it's embedded, clearly that, this is something that works, something that has support, something that I think is not just important for us, to make it viable in our community, but in order for us to get the type of genuine investment that we really want, that's what it's got to be. And so obviously there's, challenges in the appropriation of our culture and our way, like that's it's one of the things that always used to drive me nutty when I was living in Hawaii is like, random people saying, oh, you gotta kukua to aina, you know what I mean? And it's just very like surface level application. But, as I started to kind of work my way through this, I started to understand that that's the beginning. And it's not something that we should look down on. When somebody, when settler populations start throwing around aloha so casually, you talk to any Native Hawaiian, aloha is a very complex concept. It's a very, deeply rooted ideal. And it's not as simple as just like, oh, hi and hello and love, you know what I mean? And so, but it is a beginning. And it is a natural way for us to initiate a conversation and to spark a dialogue and to encourage a deeper understanding of not just, what it means to our sustainable practices, but what does it mean to our people and our culture? Because part of sustainability is not just shoring up our practices so that we're better, but it's also about, attaining a level of parity and justice, not just environmental justice, but justice, for our people. We have seen, the drastic displacement of Native peoples across the world, especially in islands. That brings me to the response to the next question about sustainable alliances, which is really my role in the G3 organizing. We recognize that the liberation of indigenous peoples, of colonized peoples, is extremely integral to the attainment of sustainable practices that are adopted on a policy level, on a government level. Here in Guam, we are an unincorporated territory. And, it's kind of like living in political purgatory. You are domestic in a foreign sense and foreign in a domestic sense. We kind of exist in this really weird gray area where, we have to have relationships with other countries, but we don't dictate the terms of those relationships. The United States really does represent us, speak for us, about us on an international level, which is challenging for us. There's a lot of opportunity for us to really grow our economy, to increase our level of self-governance, but it really begins with political status, with self-determination and decolonization. One of the things that's really exciting for me is the natural avenue that the UN SDGs create for colonized peoples like us. We are not members at the United Nations. And so, we kind of just have to assert ourselves and stick our face in where it doesn't belong, and that's just the way, that's what our neighbors have done in the past that has been successful for them. That is what we will do as well. But, creating an avenue like the SDGs to talk about decolonization, to talk about political empowerment through a different avenue, through the avenue of sustainability, the avenue of environmental justice, is a very exciting thing for us. And adding in the, President Biden's platform on environmental justice and social justice, is now creating an additional, opportunity for us to kind of bring these two sides together. Our engagement with the United Nations on, in the international community is really born out of the shortcomings of exclusive federal negotiations between Guam and Congress on our resolution of our political status. And so, we recognize that there are viable mechanisms for decolonization and self-determination at the UN level, including things like the United Nations Declaration on Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which was recently recognized by the federal EPA, which is fantastic for us. This is another great way for us to, again, raise the level of our conversation. And so in terms of alliances, there's a number of things that we do to create space on an international level for our voices. Traditionally, we engage the UN at the UN Regional Seminar, which is a gathering hosted by the C24, which is the committee that oversees decolonization efforts. We go to the C24 gathering where they review the annual resolutions on decolonization and political status, and then we go to the fourth committee gathering. Those are our regular annual engagements. However, we have recently become members of the Unrepresented Nations and Peoples Organization, which was a very important vehicle for, or I guess ally for our neighbors in their, the decolonization and resolution of political status. And so, it's exciting now that, working with the UNPO has really started to open up doors for us, even at UN Geneva, where we, have traditionally not engaged at as high a level as we do in New York. And so, these are all they seem like small things on the surface, but when all put together, they create a very comprehensive approach for the way that, we are able to assert our voice. And again, the fundamental problem is that, both on a federal and an international level, we really don't have a voice. We don't have a designated vehicle that allows us to deliver a message. It's all very informal. It all is very dependent on the ways that we assert ourselves or don't assert ourselves. And that's I think that's fundamentally that's consistent with decolonization. Decolonization must be done by the colonized people, for the colonized people. It must be led by us. And so as much as it is challenging for us, we accept that this is the reality. We accept that we must step up to the plate. And it's exciting to have avenues like G3 that allow us additional opportunity or allow us to expand on those efforts. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Melvin. I think that's a wonderful metaphor, looking at the issue of space that the UN Sustainable Development Goals create. And as Guam Green Growth, or G3, is a member of the Local 2030 Island Hub, which has a range of different island voices. That's wonderful. And thank you for emphasizing the importance of that deliberate engagement of culture embedded in sustainability, and of course the importance of Indigenous wisdom and justice. Thank you so much. I'm now delighted to turn to Suzanne MacDonald, who is Chief Community Development Officer for the Island Institute. And Suzanne and I have had a pre-conversation, and I wanted to just monopolize her for hours. She's doing a range of really fascinating work, designing the organization's strategic approach to sharing information and experience across all areas of work. And I had no idea that there were so many islands off the coast of Maine. So thank you, Suzanne, for the work that you're doing, leading a number of national and global networks focused on island sustainability as well. And Waypoints, the Community Indicators publication, the Island Fellows Program, the Solutions Library, just so much going on. I was particularly interested in the work that you are doing with regards to the development of seaweed as well, and was very keen for you to tell us more about that whole area of blue carbon. So maybe we could start there with fisheries, shellfish, aquaculture, and carbon sequestration, and how the work that you're doing could help other islands work towards growing a blue economy.
Sure. Great. Thank you, Amanda. And thank you all for having me here today. Thank you to Austin. It's been great to get to know some of the work happening in Guam through Austin in a new network that we're helping to build called the Climate Strong Islands Network. And we're really excited in my little neck of the woods to be connected to yours through that initiative. As Amanda said, I am based in Maine, in a small town in what we call Mid-Coast Maine. It's about a 3-hour drive up the coast from Boston, almost to the Canadian border. And as Amanda said, a lot of folks don't realize that Maine, our coast is quite long. It's one of the longest coastlines in the lower 48, and that we actually have thousands of small islands within 20 miles of our coastline. And the statistic that I always share is that about 100 years ago, 300 of those islands had year-round populations on them. And now there are only 15 year-round communities that remain off of our coast. And so my organization, the Island Institute, has been around for about 40 years, trying to be an extra set of hands and set of resources to partner with those remaining communities on the islands, and increasingly with a number of our coastal communities, because many of them are very rural and isolated down long peninsulas that are almost like islands, we have been providing a lot of support to them on a host of different issues to help keep their communities resilient. And as part of that has been working really hard to build relationships with other small island and islanded areas throughout the US and beyond. So it's great to be here tonight. Folks may know Maine for our iconic lobster fishery. It is something that we are very proud of and like to think of it as a very sustainable fishery because of some limitations that Maine lobstermen put into place many, many years ago to limit their catch and to invest in the future of that fishery. That said, lobstering has become very lucrative over the last 10 years in particular, and or maybe 20 years. And I think our coastal economy has become increasingly dependent on a single species to drive our marine economy. At the same time, the waters in which we rely for that are increasingly being impacted by climate change, as all of the world's oceans are. But our Gulf of Maine is actually warming faster than apparently 99% of other bodies of water in the planet. And so we do feel like our fisheries are on the front of change, and we have been begun to see some very significant impacts in terms of the warming of the water, the timing of the lobsters, the catch, and it's becoming an increasingly difficult and less reliable source of income. And so we actually first became interested as an organization in supporting fishermen and women to engage in seaweed and shellfish aquaculture as a way to just diversify their incomes and reduce the shocks that they were beginning to see brought on by the warming waters. And about 6 or 7 years ago, started a training program, an aquaculture business development program that more than 100 men and women went through on our coast to launch their own small-scale aquaculture projects, oftentimes, complementary to their lobstering. You've got a boat, you've got the ropes, you like working on the water. It was a great way to diversify and deal with the changing oceans. At the same time, we realized and began to learn more and more about the other benefits of kelp. And at the same time, looking closely at ocean acidification and how that too could have the potential impact on the shellfish industry that we were trying to help to promote. And so Maine was actually the second state in the US to launch an ocean acidification commission. We were deeply involved in helping to lead that initiative. And I think from that point in 2014 and on, really have been looking to support research efforts that can help us to understand this growing industry around kelp, seaweed and shellfish, to understand the sort of ocean acidification remediation benefits and the carbon sequestration benefits that we know can exist, particularly in kelp farming, which is what we're taking a look at. So we actually have off the coast of one of our small islands here, the longest operational kelp farm in the United States off of Chebeague Island. And we're now, as a result, a part of a global research project with Oceans 2050 to understand in a very scientific way how that carbon sequestration is working with the kelp here off the coast of Maine, and informing some efforts to develop some sort of a mechanism like carbon credits that can help to fund the development of these initiatives moving forward.
Fantastic. Thank you, Suzanne. And balancing the work that Ulalia is doing with carbon sequestration and native forests and seeing what you're doing with kelp, just very encouraging to see this new dimension of the blue economy, in addition to the challenges you enumerated around ocean warming and acidification too. So absolutely fascinating. Thank you. And finally, to our last speaker, and we will then open up for questions and comments from our panelists. My great pleasure to introduce Dr. Cecilio Ortiz Garcia, whose areas of expertise include energy, policy, and governance in Puerto Rico, sustainable transitions management in developing nations, and public participation in energy and environmental decision-making. So Dr. Garcia is the co-founder of the University of Puerto Rico's National Institute of, I'm just getting a message that unfortunately Dr. Garcia is not with us today. Do I have that right, Tori? And we're going to move straight on to our final speaker, Martyn Forde. So sorry, we will move straight to Martyn, who is an energy and knowledge management consultant, who is the community leader of an online energy learning platform from the Caribbean, which has over 1,100 energy professionals. So that is quite a network, Martyn. The Carolec Renewable Energy Community. So we're very much looking forward to hearing your sharing how community members are connecting to research, fellow subject matter experts, and training opportunities. So Martyn, we know you've been assisting in all of these areas and also in the development of national energy policies and plans. And I was particularly interested when we spoke a few days ago to hear about the major energy portfolios that you've been engaged with in the Caribbean. So we know that energy is a really important part of island sustainability. And over to you, very much looking forward to hearing your views.
Yeah, thank you very much, Amanda, and hello to all the panelists. It's good to see you. Working in the Caribbean has been very interesting because in the last, I want to say decade, even when I was a student, the transition from where then, the momentum is ever increasing. And uniquely working with the online community with the utilities, we have 35 plus utilities across the Caribbean. And what has stood out to me is the resilience of the human resource that exists in different islands, and small teams taking things to another level. I think one of the most interesting moments for me is seeing how the teams mobilize post-disaster, where the utilities come together and basically offer their linesmen to whichever country is affected. This happened with Maria, this happened with Irma, this happened with Dorian. And it really struck to me that much of this development of renewable energy really comes to a capacity issue. And not just capacity building, but capacity development more broadly. So that includes capacity, not just, like I said, capacity building, but capacity strengthening, capacity sharing. And what we try to do is actually highlight some of the projects that have been successes and capture what those lessons are, and even projects where they've had challenges, and share them monthly with each other. I think last year, one of the, everyone was facing the COVID pandemic. And what we were worried about coming on to May and June was the up and coming hurricane season. So what we did at Carolec was we designed a resilient power series to show how electric utilities, how the work they're doing for resilience impacts not only within that industry, but also is connected to other areas vital to creating resilience. So that being like insurance, the insurance industry. And that was one of the most insightful things, is how do we create an environment where these lessons are shared in such a way that we demystify the transition and reduce that perceived risk, especially when it comes to entities that control finances, banks, and insurance agencies, etc. But as you said, Amanda, in the region, we do have quite the push for renewables, and some countries, like my own country, Barbados, we have a 100% renewable energy target by 2030, and it's really shown me how strong leadership plays a great role in that, and effective communication. Oh, sorry, you're on mute.
I'm on mute. You'd think we'd be over that by now, so apologies.
No,
It's fascinating to see this good practice sharing. When I ran the New Zealand Development Agency, our Pacific Island partners were very keen to co-develop energy roadmaps towards 100% renewable energy. And it was fascinating just to hear your comments on capacity development, which of course is such a big issue, particularly in small island states. And your point also about how these issues are interconnected. So with insurance, and I'm thinking of the very successful project that took place in Puerto Rico after the hurricane, where schools were equipped with solar panels. And recently, when there was another small hurricane, those schools served as disaster shelters and meant that people were able to have electricity, refrigeration. So I'm hoping that we might be able to pick that up in Hawaii, given that it was Hank Rogers and the Blue Planet Alliance that helped with the Red Cross and that project. So those kinds of lessons learned, as you say, are just so important. One question that's popped up that I'd love to ask you, Martyn, before asking everybody what your top takeaway for other islands would be in terms of best practice. So Martyn, the question is, the Blue Planet Alliance is wanting to connect with islands that are committed to the 100% renewable energy goal, or to help create that goal as Hawaii has, and now with everybody working towards it, where the momentum is really building. So would love to hear your views on whether you think there might be members of CARELEC that would like to join that Blue Planet Alliance movement towards 100% renewable energy targets.
Yeah, well, working with CARELEC, especially in the last year with, like I said, with the Resilient Power Series, we actually had the Pacific Power Association. At the time, it was Andrew Daka, who was the director there. He reached out, and different teams from the Pacific region reached out to be part of the webinars on topics such as energy storage, right? And I think there now is the time for us to, sometimes we go into an engagement and we would be worried that, okay, I come from a different geography, I might not understand the culture. That is true. You have to initiate the intent. You have to understand the cultural milieu. You have to understand the dynamics in order to engage on the terms of that space. But what is happening now with the momentum of climate change is we have the technologies that we can consolidate around and the shared issues. And like I said in the beginning, the momentum from when I was a student to now in the last decade, we've seen so many projects aggregate right now. And it's just going to start to increase even more, and different models that we're going into, because you have the issues of equity, like how do we create truly resilient spaces? And it really does come down to people. And one thing I've realized about islands, that's our greatest resource. And there's so much that we can learn from Hawaii, the Pacific Islands. I do really think that open sharing of lessons and open sharing of challenges and that co-creation of solutions is definitely needed, especially as we go into greater levels of penetration for renewable energy. The dynamics and the problems change as we get beyond 25%, 55%.
Oh.
This is happening in Hawaii. This is something that we're going to see, and we're unique as well, because you would have some islands where they might have a great resource like geothermal, but the load that they have to meet is so small that the economies of scale is not, and it doesn't make sense, or it has its challenges. But I think that's where you have to look beyond the industry. So like I would say looking at the innovative spaces where economy can be driven, that the renewable energy can supply. So for example, like cold storage for transportation of agricultural products. For some islands, can we use the extra baseload energy to create those sort of environments? Data storage, blockchain mining.
Yeah.
I only mentioned that because you mentioned Hank Rogers and him being in the tech space.
That's a great point. And I know Iceland, for example, as an island, has really leveraged its additional geothermal energy for data storage and blockchain. So it's very interesting to see that the different possibilities there are for islands. So thank you so much. And I'm going to come back now in the order in which we started. So Ulalia, turning to you, and the recommendations that you would have in sharing best practices around islands rising for natural solutions?
Thank you, and thank you, everybody. I want to build a little bit on what Martyn was just sharing about, one of the strengths that we have is in sharing our knowledge and our expertise, and what's in my mind right now is sort of a 3 or more tiered approach that goes from local to global. And this sharing network that we have is at a number of the tiers in between. And strength in every one of those aspects of this, sort of local to global, I think is what we have. We need to keep it energized and keep it functioning well in order for that to become a rhythm and a best practice and something we use. So what do I mean by that? Is in each one of our locations, and you've heard it from this panel and every panel over the course of this conference, at the local level, we have deep expertise. We understand our places, we understand our threats. And we have an awareness of what's happening in our regions a little larger than us and what's happening at the global level. And we make it relevant for ourselves, but that deep knowledge and deep experience and history in place is absolutely, I think, core. And so how do we keep that strong? Because sometimes while we're looking and connecting globally, I worry that we also may not be investing as deeply locally, because we need to keep up there. And then the sharing that happens in our sort of in intermediate levels, all in order to demonstrate that what we're doing in small islands and locally is having a big impact on the global. The global continues to influence, and there are goals there, but they have to touch down and be relevant in place and be useful to the communities that need to thrive in these ever-changing places.
That's wonderful. Thank you. That whole idea of the local action for global goals. And there's a comment from Ellis and Rata about President Biden having set a goal of 40% plus benefits from future legislative spending to flow to disadvantaged communities as part of the Justice 40 initiative, including the $2 trillion infrastructure plan. So wanting just to alert you to that question in case there are particular examples that you would like to share with regards to this. And Alison says she realizes this is a thought exercise only for non-US associated islands, but important to be thinking big around solutions. So Melvin, over to you with Alison's thought in mind.
Sorry. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a great perspective to take, and an important one. It's fantastic that there is consideration for disadvantaged communities, for sustainability, environmental justice, parity in our social systems. I think that a lot of for islands, I think a big challenge is in environmental justice, in the sense that there are very important, relevant things that we need to be doing now that lead us into the future, but we also are dealing with quite a bit of environmental injustice, longstanding injustice. We have experienced, almost every island has experienced a certain level of environmental degradation and contamination, that continues to plague us. Like on Guam, we have a number of Superfund sites, that were, a result of military dumping post-war. And, it's no coincidence that the people on Guam suffer from, high rates of non-communicable diseases and cancers. And so, I think that that's something that's really important, is that we have to create a policy that moves in the approach with a sense of justice, environmental justice, because environmental justice is not just about, our lands and our oceans. It's about the impact that it has on our people and our ability to be self-sustaining. We've also been very displaced. On Guam, the military occupies a third of the island, a place with limited landmass. It's valuable farming, agricultural land, valuable land for homes. So I think that these things, this type of environmental justice and parity is definitely very important. And I think that any kind of funding and support and policy-driven action is helpful for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Suzanne.
Sure, I think I'll build off some of the themes that I've heard already. I think the piece that we are really trying to lean into here in our region as climate increasingly affects our communities is that idea that we've been hearing about around this co-creation of solutions. What we're really interested in our work is what are the conditions in which that can actually occur. And we've heard tonight that there's a lot of power equity, all sorts of historic issues that can create barriers to be able to participate in that co-creation, and sort of what does it take to create those conditions where we can. Right now, I'm spending a lot of my time talking about offshore wind siting in the Gulf of Maine and what that means for our lobster fishery, and the sort of how do we value the local knowledge of people who have spent generations, their families on the water, and how can we bring that to help create a solution and make this work? What are the conditions in which we can start to have constructive dialogue and deal with all of the challenges around it? And the piece that I think can help as well, that you've heard a bit about, is just the value of learning from other regions, the peer-to-peer connections. I just think the more that we can all connect to each other, we come from very different geographies and power, political systems, but at the same time, I work in communities that are incredibly small, that are limited by people and hours in the day, and very much that idea of positive deviance. The ideas are there. We just need the time and ability to uncover what's there. So we are very invested in connecting to other island and islanded regions to see how we can, really bring the best resources to the table to come up with solutions that can work for our smallest and most remote communities.
Wonderful. Thank you, Suzanne. And Martyn, last word from you.
I would like to echo what Ms. Woodside said about local, and I think we need to focus on the local and on the critical infrastructure first. How do we make that resilient? And when I say focus on the local, right now, post-COVID, we're looking at how do we create knowledge economies around taking what is seen as a threat and how we have adapted and survived and how we're taking it on. That needs to be codified. And not to say that we are living labs, but these are livelihoods, and start using that narrative of how we approach the problem. I think in doing that, islands, we can be, like when the dinosaurs went extinct, it was the smaller mammals that were able to adapt. I think we are lucky that our size is actually our strength, and the more networks that we create and more connections, the power of network is great. And so we really want to enhance the dots, not just connect them.
I love that. Enhance the dots, not just connect them. And in this UN Decade for Action that ocean icon Sylvia Earle calls the most important decade in the next 10,000, this whole notion of resilience and knowledge sharing is so critical. This has been an amazing panel, really covering everything from the blue economy to regenerative agriculture, the importance of renewable energy, and of course, most importantly, environmental justice, the link between justice and sustainability. So thank you all. Just so much wisdom and depth of knowledge there. And these three elements, the deep local knowledge, indigenous wisdom as a foundation, and then as Ulalia called it, that intermediate level of sharing with each other as island ecosystems. And I love your term, Martyn, of the living lab, to really then think about the global impact that we can have when we're not just connecting the dots, but actually enhancing them. Thank you all for a wonderful session. And Lauren, back to you.
Thank you, Amanda, former UN Ambassador and Director of Global Partnerships at ASU Wrigley Global Futures Laboratory. And Sa'aina Ma'asi to our panelists for sharing how you are taking action for a more just and resilient future for your island communities. Truly inspiring and innovative.